This is my prized possession. This is the culmination of John Wetz's lifetime of experience thinking about steam. He didn't have any money and his machine work was a little shaky. His craftsmanship wasn't quite there, but it took me, I have 3 or 4 or 5 of his machines. When he got older, he gave me everything, and his daughters gave me the rest of it that he hadn't given me. And I had this in my possession for a year before I figured out why it did what it did. And we will look at this later, but this is the boiler here. Basically it starts out being a rocket stove. You put corn cobs and walnut shells in here. The fire goes down here. There's coils for the steam generator here. And the engine, we will go over later, is a completely worn out weed whacker engine here that is bash valve. The oil tank is here. The water tank is the coffee can sitting on the front fender. He made his own solenoid by winding the copper wire himself to make a solenoid. Once you get past that, actually this one he has a legitimate Bourdon tube. Usually he makes those himself, or made those himself. It was absolutely stunning. So I asked him once, I said, "John, how did you come up with this idea?" Well, he said he was holding his styrofoam cup of coffee. He spent most of his life holding a cup of coffee and trying to get his pipe lit all at the same time. And he was doing this. And he said it dawned on him that when you made this shorter, this was longer. When you made that shorter, this was longer. And so he was getting a feedback mechanism by making things shorter and longer. So when you're trying to control a steam generator, you have several things happening. For example, here, this is an example. We have a circular spring steel thing, which we have, I'll show you over here where it is. And there's 2 things that happen in a monotube boiler. One is when you put in cold water, this thing contracts and it squeezes this thing this way, which then makes this thing longer. And so you have the hot steam goes in here, comes out here. So this measures steam temperature. This measures when you get a slug of water that goes in. Your water pump is controlled by a steam temperature device, which measures the steam that comes out at the very end of a long tube. So you can pump water in the cold end, and the hot end doesn't realize that cold water's been pumped in until the water's there and a slug of water gets into the engine and breaks it. So you need to have a sensor. You need to sense 3 things. You need to sense when the fire is on. The fire comes on when the steam pressure goes down, because that symbolizes that the boiler needs to make steam. So when you have low pressure, it needs to make steam. You make steam by building a larger fire. So when the fire comes on, the fire is underneath this. When the fire comes on, it heats these two things up. And when these things heat up, something happens. These two things are merely tight at each end, so that as it gets cold and it contracts, it pushes this spring thing in. This end of this tube, which is the tube that the steam goes through, is welded to this. So the whole tube goes back and forth. At this end, there's a hole drilled into this strap, so that this thing here just kind of goes back and forth. It slides back and forth and it's not bound anywhere. And then we have two micro switches. Here's two micro switches right here. Here's an old hacksaw blade. And so this goes back and forth like this. And you have a moment arm back here. We have a fulcrum and a moment arm, which means that you have a mechanical advantage. So all this thing here has to do is move just a fraction of an inch, and by the time you go through all these mechanical advantages, the little micro switches turn on and off. The micro switches control the fire, and they control the water pump, depending on which way it wants to go. So that's the genius of the operation, and many better people than John Wetz, who was an old guy who was poor all his life, did not have a good workshop, did not have a good machine setup, did not have, a good machine shop. He just made things with what he could find alongside the road. At one time, this was working as a demonstrator, and it did a beautiful job of clicking on and off. Now, so over here, as you can see, he was a little low budget. The coffee can is his water tank. The batteries are hanging down below. The fire is a rocket stove thing. You can look down in there, and what you do is you throw wood in here, and it burns, and there is a fan. Right here is a squirrel cage fan, which runs off of this little electric motor. John Wetz got kind of cheap on his belt drive here. It's a nylon rope with belt dressing on it. And so what this does is when it needs the fire, the electric motor turns on, and it turns this fan, which pulls air from right down here. And when it pulls the air from there, the fire gets sucked down through the pipe in the middle, down to here, comes back up through these coils. And the coils are right in here like this. And so by the time the air gets through the coils, it's cooled off quite a bit, so it doesn't burn out the fan. So now we know that when it needs more power, the fan turns on, draws the combustion air down through the fuel, hits all the way to the bottom, comes back up, and the coils are all around that tube that goes down, but the fire comes back up, goes over here, comes here, goes up the smokestack. Well, then you're making steam, assuming that the water pump works. The water pump is over here. As you can see, it's kind of homemade. We have an eccentric, and we have a little plunger thing that goes in and out of this aluminum block, and that pumps water. And there is a steel ball bearing in here which acts as the check valve, which is how pumps work, because you have check valves. When you do not want to pump water, because this runs all the time. When you do not want to pump water, you run electricity through the homemade solenoid, which pulls the ball bearing off the seat. And so this just pumps back and forth but doesn't work against pressure. So there's any number of things happening. When you get too much steam pressure, the Bourdon tube here flicks a micro switch somewhere which turns the fan off, which lowers the fire. It's all very complex. It's all very important that all these things work together. Now, if we come around on this side, you can see where the real action is. You can see that we have, this is the spring steel ring, which is doing this kind of business. The cold water is going through here, which makes it the cold water, the fresh water that goes into the boiler comes through here. The pump pumps it into this side, it comes to here, and then it goes into the coils, and that's your feed water to make steam. So then, when it gets really hot, this thing expands, and it makes this long lever. You have quite a mechanical advantage with this lever. And somewhere this lever operates a micro switch. It appears that the micro switch has fallen off in the excitement over the years, but there's a micro switch here, and this, as you can see, moves against the spring. And so that's sort of the way it works. So you're reading when the fire's on, everything expands, and you want to pump water. When you pump water, you only want to pump water for a short period of time. You pump it for too long a period of time, and it floods the boiler, and it puts a slug of water into the engine, which breaks the engine. So what you have to, the whole purpose of the cold water business is there's a certain amount of hysteresis in this. So you want the water to pump for a few seconds, to pump water through a few of the coils, and then you want it to stop. And that is why when the fire's on, this thing expands and turns the water on. When the water is turned on, it cinches up tight, turns off the water pump, gives it a few minutes for everything to heat up again. If you're still using steam, it heats up again, turns the fire on, turns the water pump on. So this is clicking on and off all the time, but it doesn't stay on long enough to flood the boiler. Well, many very intelligent people have attempted many times to figure out how in the world, when you have a pipe several dozen feet long in this case, in the case of my larger boiler over there, 300 or 400 feet long, you have cold water coming in one end, you have hot steam coming out the other. You want to control the steam temperature, but you don't know where the water is in this whole, it can be anywhere in that several hundred feet of pipe. So you have to just put things in little bits and pieces and let them warm up, and so you're turning stuff on and off and on and off. So it works really, really good, and it's really interesting. So what we have here, the engine itself is a very worn out weed whacker engine. And if you know what you're looking at here, you can see some insulation around the cylinder. You knock the fins off the weed whacker. You take out the spark plug and you put in a little doohickey thing that holds a little ball bearing on a seat. You weld a little stubby nail that has been sawed off into the head of your piston, so it comes up at top dead center. It knocks the ball bearing off of its seat and it allows steam to go in. Otherwise, your steam pressure is holding the ball bearing up against the seat. And so that allows a slug of steam to go in, which makes the thing work, particularly if you have a nice flywheel like this. So you have everything you need for a major steam power plant. You have a water pump, which is handy. You have a fire, which consists of fuel with air drawing through it with this fan, which is handy. You have coils in here, which have the heat going up through them like this, have the water coming down through it, and you turn the steam or the water into steam, and you adjust this so it turns it into just the correct temperature and pressure of steam that you want. And that's what all these little things are doing here. You've got little wires going places, you've got little pieces of tubing going places. See here, for example, is your water, your feed water comes out of your water pump, goes through here, goes down here, this is the cold water part that makes this go this way. The hot steam part comes through here, which makes this thing go this way, and this is the spring unit, which adds together both the contractions and the expansion. When you first start the fire, the expansion is such that it immediately calls, this heats up, this heats up, this gets longer, and it turns on the little micro switch. Usually a monotube boiler is very, very difficult to control with a solid fuel source of heat, because you can't turn it on and off. You've got beds of coals, you have all kinds of interesting things happening. You have a very long hysteresis to turn the heat up and down. Well, John Wetz figured out that what you do is you put your fire above your coils, you don't put them below, and you only have the heat from the fire going through the coils when your fan is on, pulling the heat through. Otherwise, the fire's up here, the heat's going up this way, and it's not burning out your coils. And you can control how much heat goes through the coils by how fast you turn the fan, if you have that modulating control. Otherwise, you just cycle it on and off. So he has these different safety features in here. The reason I called it a rocket stove is you can take long sticks and put in here because it burns from the bottom. John has in the other building we have a compact pickup truck with the boiler on the back of the truck made out of a 50-gallon drum, and it's got a big burner on top with a funnel in here and all kinds of stuff, and he needed a grate. There's a hole here, so he needed a grate to hold the coal ashes and coal and sticks of wood up there. The grate happens to be a sprocket from a 10-speed bicycle. We still wonder how that got alongside the road, but that's beside the point. So what this bicycle shows is it is a three-dimensional blueprint for exactly how you theoretically control all of the 3 or 4 variables that you need to make steam. When you have a vehicle, you don't, nothing knows whether you're going to stop in the next 5 seconds or go like mad in the next 5 seconds. And so it has to be completely flexible. If you have a power station, you throw in the coal, makes the fire, and you make steam and electricity consistently. This is entirely different. This has to be responsive to use, and with a solid fuel, wood type of burn fuel, it's extremely tricky to get the heat out of it and to turn the heat off. So John Wetz calculated all of the variables, figured out how to deal with it. And this is the culmination of his work. The engine is one of the simplest and least sophisticated engines there is. It's a weed whacker. You just unscrew the spark plug and you put another little doohickey thing in there that's got a little ball bearing sitting on a little conical seat. And the bash valve means that the piston itself, when it reaches top dead center, opens the valve and lets the steam in. For those of you who are thinking ahead, will figure out that this engine will run backwards as well as it will run frontwards, which means that you do not want to stall on a hill because it'll start rolling backwards, and when you put the steam to it, it will go backwards really fast down the hill, the opposite of the way you want. Well, that's a little awkward, so you don't drive this on hills very much or stall it. The rest of the time it works pretty good. We're now going to look at another bicycle which has some really, really good features in it. And this, John Wetz lived in northern Illinois, lived to be in his 90s, was just the nicest old guy you ever thought. I asked him how he figured all this stuff out and what the variables were, and he said, "I'll just look at it and figure it out." So I have another bicycle I bought from an old guy out on Vancouver Island, which is the other side of British Columbia. And he was a very, very good craftsman. And his boiler is very antiquated. As you can see, with these older vehicles, we have a little problem keeping air in the tire. But we're able to deal with that. Let me turn this around the right direction. Everything has to be perfect for this to be a good movie.